Great to be here with you. I hope that with a lecture like this, I don't have to tell you right now to turn off your cell phones. But I do want you to know the punishment will be severe. If your phone does go off, I'm going to call you up to the front. I just want you to know I have a sledgehammer in the back, and you know where it's going to go from there. All right? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to tell you at what age to first allow your teenager to have a smartphone. But you'd better figure that one out, because it makes a very big difference as part of a cluster of issues that demands to be addressed. This is an exceedingly difficult topic for a number of reasons, and at the end you might end up saying, I wish you had given more particulars. What do I do about this? What do I do about this? What do I do about this? What we must do is have the principles. I am seeking here to aid you in thinking about how you're going to approach, in many ways, the practical issue of our age. We have a crisis. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to give, as it were, the lecture in 5 minutes, and then I'm going to give the lecture. Then we'll have time for discussion. So please do. I'm very, very open to questions of any kind. Science is utterly incapable of giving proper, ultimate direction to key questions. What technologies to develop? Science as such is utterly incapable of addressing that question. How to use technologies well. Science as such utterly incapable of addressing that question. Information that will be helpful, not able to address the question. What else or who else is incapable? Anyone with a fundamental approach of profit will be incapable of well addressing the questions, what technologies to develop and how to use them. Anyone who is most interested in power will be utterly incapable of addressing these absolutely critical questions. And you ready for something that's scary? This little, I'm going to say, toxic trio of kind of a science that doesn't know its place. I'm not saying all science doesn't know its place, but much practice of science in our society is a science acting out of bounds. So a trio of scientific input of big business, seeking fundamentally to make money, and of other players that are seeking power, I present for your consideration, are the main determining factors of the technology that is in your pocket right now and all around you. That's not conspiracy theory, that's reality. And anyone who doesn't see that, I think, is not alert to the world in which we live. We have a crisis of the development of technology, and the fundamental uses of technology are determined by factors / people / forces / organizations that should not. What should give direction? Who / what can, what agency, as it were, broadly speaking, is what agency, not group, can answer the question, what technologies to develop? How to use technology? Well, something called right practical reasoning. In a healthy society, right practical reasoning and the virtue of it, which is called, stand in awe, prudence, an intellectual virtue, gives order at all levels. In any healthy society, there is a prudence that gives order to life at all levels: individual, domestic, meaning the household, and political. Our astounding tradition has a sense of 3 kinds of prudence. We're going to go more into that. Ladies and gentlemen, what is in your power? I told you I'm going to give you, in a sense, the whole lecture right here in 5 minutes. What's in your power? Develop a certain kind of prudence, especially one that you've perhaps never heard of, called domestic prudence, for the principles of which we need to be well educated. In a more healthy society, the principles of it might have been passed on by tradition, passed on by custom. We don't live in such a society, so it's more important than ever that we study these things, and we turn to our great tradition and study philosophy and theology. This gives insight, by the way, to something that only those who understand will ever understand, and everyone else will laugh. When you read the Republic, and Plato says, when he comes to the key moment, who should rule? The philosophers. Isn't that a good laugher right there? The philosopher kings. This astounding piece of wisdom, this transcendently important piece of wisdom, this beyond worth, that what matters in life is who rules. Plato was extremely attuned to this, and he dealt with extremely intelligently the issue of who will be giving direction, who will be guiding people, who will be setting the context, who will be giving order to things. At the societal level, what must we do to get good rulers? If there's one thing living in our age ought to make eminently clear, is Plato knew what he was talking about. It's arduous to ever find a way to try to assure that those who are wise rule us. Human life demands that it be governed by practical wisdom or prudence at various levels. Otherwise, human life can be astoundingly ugly. So what am I saying is in your power? A prudence that is this beautiful kind of right in the middle, something that's beyond you and me in many ways, is going to be to have a much direct effect on getting a wise ruler at the political level. I'm not saying we can't do anything. But one thing that is directly in our power, in our households, is what will give order and what will govern there. That is the issue of life. And we have in our power to take responsibility for what happens in our households and to recognize that it's about prudence, seeing the human good and ordering all things to it. Let's talk a little bit more here really quickly about setting up the crisis. We develop technologies that we shouldn't. Let me say that again. We develop technologies that never should have been developed. It's important that we recognize that. Not every application of human reason to come up with some tool was a good one. Wise people know there's certain, quote, tools you never want in your toolbox. Frankly, even if there could be a good use of a certain tool in your toolbox, but you know from human experience that the vast majority of times it would ever be taken out, it will be misused, would you not find another way of doing whatever that good thing was that could have been done with that tool? Wise people are not interested in technologies that don't truly serve the human good. We develop technologies we shouldn't, and then we use them, often even making them functionally mandatory in everyday life. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to hold back here, and if you want to disagree at some point, bring up questions, do so. I'm going to give as an example, I'm just going to say it, the handheld smartphone. Now, hear me. I would be willing to argue our world would be much better without it. It shouldn't have been developed, but it has been. Now, if one has to use it, then this is a tautology. If you have to use it, then guess what? We use it because if you have to, then by definition, you're going to. So that we have to be subtle in thinking about these things. So by my saying what I just said, that doesn't mean that nobody should use it, but we have to be able to make the distinction and recognize there are certain things that we might have been better off as human persons without. And I defy somebody. So I'm just being a little bit aggressive. I defy, that was to drop the defile. Okay, relax, John. I'm sorry. All right. I don't defy you. I invite you. I'm smiling. Let's talk about our young people and the net influence of having something that constantly removes them from where they live. For goodness sake, when they walk through God's woods. I go on. We misuse technologies that might be acceptable or good in themselves, but which lend themselves to overuse. I had an example, but I'm going to provoke you and not tell you it at the moment. Sometimes it's hard to tell whether the technology comes under A or B, one that we would have been better off never to have developed, or maybe it's reasonable to develop, but we should just be using it less. For our purposes right now, that doesn't really matter. One way or the other, we are living in an over-technologized life that threatens fundamental human goods, such as bodily competences and skills, habits of presence and conversation, and so of friendship, silence and the interior life, to name a few giants that are threatened at their root by our over-technologized life. My focus is in the home. A case can be made that what we do in the home versus in industry or government, again, this is part of the good news, is the heart of the matter. Why? Home is where the fundamental attitudes and dispositions of human life are formed. If children and adults live in the home as if the main activities of life, think work, think leisure, should be conditioned and determined by advanced technologies, then they will tend to live that way everywhere they go. But on the other hand, if children and adults live in the home as though what should most determine our work and our leisure are certain ordinary, deeply human dispositions and goods that precede and should limit and form any technologies, then they will live that wherever they go. We can do that for ourselves. We can do that for our children. Home is where the right attitude to technology is most obviously called for. I'm going to say that again. Home is where the right attitude to technology is most obviously called for. In home, it has the most immediate and obvious implications for what matters most. A husband and a wife, let's go with the arc, a husband and a wife have the most obvious context to recognize if technology is getting in the way of life. That's going to most come out right there, where that takes on the flesh of eyes that are waiting to be met, etc. May I put it simply, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers should, in any age, but especially today, carefully scrutinize any technology, asking, will it truly aid us in living a fully human life? Sounds so simple, but the failure to do this is the crisis of technology today. In homes, in industry, in government, in civilization, or what is left of it. The failure is all around us, and honestly, it's in our homes, too. We fail to limit and give form to our technological practices in view of how they serve the good life or not. And you and I need to take responsibility for that. What am I going to do now? I'm going to make a couple of philosophical distinctions, say a quick word about technology in general, and then give some practical implications. Can get a little bit philosophical. You ready? Here's the key assertion of my paper at 50,000 feet, especially in view of the topic of our conference. A foundational contribution of the Catholic intellectual tradition, rooted in ancient philosophy, is the appropriate distinctions about the different uses of human reason. I know that sounds a bit abstract. Different uses of human reason. Here we go. Think here especially the definition of science, an ordered body of sure or certain knowledge. The whole faith and science question changes when we start with the old school definition of science and then evaluate our linguistic usages today in view of that. But that's not what's given to me here in this lecture right now. Then we have a distinction of different kinds of sciences, speculative versus practical. All right, ready? We're moving towards something really big here. I know it's hard to feel it. Here it comes. This distinction of practical and speculative sciences is a matter of two kinds of reasoning, speculative and practical reasoning. Aristotle's the master of this. Plato saw it too. Aristotle's the master. Speculative reasoning is thinking or intellection ordered simply to knowing the truth. Practical reasoning is thinking or intellection ordered towards action. One is knowing truth for its own sake. One is knowing truth for the sake of doing something with that truth. Practical intellection is always how to. This is one of the most basic and significant distinctions regarding human life, and today it is functionally ignored. Almost all education completely ignores speculative truth and sciences. Again, not our focus for now. The distinction between speculative and practical reasoning is foundational. It shows up in many places. In theology, the distinction between the things that are just about knowing the Trinity, for instance, versus moral theology, which is practical, is a how to live the good life. This is rooted in philosophy. Aristotle brought this out very well. Distinction between speculative sciences and practical sciences. There's physics in Aristotle's sense is a very speculative. It's about seeing the truth. What now, to move to the point, is the key kind of how to or practical reasoning? The key here for us is an oft overlooked distinction within practical reasoning. All right, so now we have speculative reasoning, practical reasoning. Our topic is technology. Ladies and gentlemen, it's about practical reasoning. It's about how-to reasoning. Ready for the key distinction? All practical reasoning is how-to, but Aristotle, St. Thomas distinguished two kinds of how-to reasoning. This language won't be familiar, but I'm going to give it to you in such a way you'll be able to take it with me. Take it with you. All right? There's reasoning about doing, and there's reasoning about making. These are both practical. Reasoning about doing and reasoning about making. It's hard to explain, although it's a rather straightforward because we don't have common vocabulary ready at hand. The bottom line is reasoning about doing is reasoning about how to be a good human being, how to live a good life. Reasoning about making is thinking about how to do some specific craft well, how to put order into something out there, but not order into human life itself. All right, so we have this fundamental distinction between doing and making, two fundamental kinds of practical reasoning. The way, or how-to reasoning, the way that you're going to remember that is that the tradition points to two different, quote, virtues that govern each. Guess what the name of the virtue is that governs practical thinking, how-to thinking about doing, about how to live a good life. What's the name of that virtue? Say it out loud. Prudence. Thank you very much. And in the tradition, the name of the virtue having to do with making is called art. Art is a very, very important, broad term, not just the fine arts, or the fine arts are an example of that. It's a kind of how-to thinking. If you have the art of painting, it's a how-to about how to paint. Carpentry, medicine, these are how-to arts. Arts are excellences of how-to thinking. But this is key in the tradition. This is where the philosophy of it is really important. They're not considered virtues in the full sense. Prudence is a virtue in the full sense. Prudence is the queen of the natural virtues. Any true virtue can never be misused. There's no such thing as misusing justice. There's no such thing as misusing courage. You can't misuse the cardinal virtue of prudence. Any of the arts you can misuse. You can misuse carpentry. You can misuse medicine. You can misuse rhetoric. You can't misuse prudence. All right? What's the big deal then? The whole key to getting technology right is this distinction in our tradition. It's right there in our wisdom. And what is the principle? Prudence, and there's several kinds that we've mentioned, must govern all practical reasoning. It must have priority in all practical thinking. All how-to thinking about making all of the things that we call arts, the vast, vast, vast majority of almost everything that is now studied today in education, must come under the governance of prudence. Otherwise, it's like a child cut loose to govern itself. All art, all reasoning about making must be governed by this astounding thing called practical wisdom, called prudence. And to bring this home, pun intended, to bring this home, the best example of this principle goes right to the heart of our current topic. What Aquinas calls domestic prudence should govern all practical reasoning of what we do in the household. What is domestic prudence? The virtue of ordering every aspect of life in the household to the true good of its members. Can I say that astounding thing again? It's a virtue of governing everything in the household to the true good of its members. So may I say this to you? If you got married once upon a time, naturally speaking, it's precisely that you signed up for. With your spouse, your life is about developing and enacting domestic prudence, the understanding of how to give order to everything in the life of the home for the true good of its members. This is the heart of the wise answer of our tradition to the problem of technology in the home. Don't worry, I'm not going to leave it at 20,000 feet. But we must see that first. Otherwise, all the details will never really take root. They'll never really make the difference. We need to reestablish the proper place of domestic prudence. Make it the central daily focus of your life. Again, what I'm going to say in terms of a married couple, of the myriad of practical things that come up, that it immediately always go back to, and I mean this in total seriousness and from the depth of my heart. Dear, how does this decision affect who we are and who God is calling us to be, and how we're forming our children, and how we're making our home a place to show the glory of God? This is not an exaggeration. It's very simple and straightforward because it has immediate content-rich implications, because it's from that perspective that you can address the question, what technology should we make? What technology should we use? How should we use it? I am going to say something I put a number of quotations from papal encyclicals about the problem of technology. And this will be a little frustrating to you, but then again, I think you'd be more frustrated if I tried to do it. What the popes call the technological paradigm connects this whole issue of technology to kind of the root moral drama of the human life. And to get it straight is an entire lecture in itself, and so I don't want to do a sloppy job of it, but then again, I'm going to try to put it in 2 sentences. The inner logic of technology is toward control and power. That in itself is not bad. Pope Francis, I think, did this very clearly in Laudato Si. And it's repeated by Pope Leo, but not he just kind of repeats it very, very quickly. So 4 minutes and then it's the Q&A time. Gotcha. I might just push you 2 beyond that if I may, but okay, thank you. The inner logic of technology is toward control and power. This appeals strongly to our fallen, selfish inclinations. It tends toward the overthrow of prudence unless it is directly and intentionally put under the governance of the kind of thinking that we just enunciated as being prudence. So again there, I'm going to say the key to addressing the problem of the inner logic, the technocratic paradigm, and how that tends to threaten the good life, tends to appeal to our concupiscence, appeal to our selfishness, is going to be to turn to prudence. Reasoning about the good life that is always rooted in unselfishness, generosity, life, love, serving the Lord. All right, my practical implications. Ready? List of 3. 1, I'm going to get more general and then more specific. 1, intentionality. In exercising domestic prudence. Prudence is always applying universal principles in concrete circumstances. This demands a clear conception of the good life you're trying to craft. It demands a clear conception of what builds up that good life versus what subtly or not so subtly hinders it. It calls for a clear perception of the particular needs and challenges of your own household. Point 2, be skeptical of innovation. Or put otherwise, give the benefit of the doubt to the simpler, older ways. I can't emphasize this enough, and I will not back down. Be skeptical of innovation. It should tell us something. All those commercials, we're innovators. Why do you want something new? Unless it's better. And in general, is our society serving us new things that are better? This is not a defensive position. This is a wise position. Be skeptical of innovation. This is the key, given how the pendulum has swung toward the technocratic paradigm that always gives the benefit of the doubt to the new, the more efficient, etc. This is not an anti-technology approach. It certainly isn't anti-science. But it does recognize that much of the attention and focus of scientific research and development has been driven by technological thinking run amok. Now my final practical thing. Develop a detailed visualization of rich life in your home, focusing on good work and true leisure. Develop a detailed visualization of rich life in your home, focusing on good work and true leisure. Then take a strategic approach to which technologies fit with this, but must be limited, which must be largely eliminated. Yes, certain technologies will be leaned into, but generally as a way of making possible something non-technologically mediated. The most important things in life are the non-technologically mediated ones. I'm going to close now by reading you, and just listen to it if you will. I warn you beforehand. I put it before you. One can say, "Oh, that's being unrealistic. That's being nostalgic. That's talking about something that doesn't exist." And I challenge you: does what I'm going to read you right now give a vision of a foundation that we change as necessary to apply in our age, and have a specific visualization of the good work and the true leisure of the life we want in our home as the proximate basis for asking about those technologies? This was from when a little Vietnamese girl asked Pope Benedict what it was like when he was a boy. Thank you, dear, and your parents. I thank you from my heart. And it's a longish paragraph, but it is the end of mine. Thank you, dear, and your parents. I thank you from my heart. Well, You asked about my memories of what my family are like. There would be a lot. I wanted to say only a few things. Sunday was always the important time for our family, but Sunday already began Saturday evening. Father read the readings to us from a book that was very popular in Germany at that time. The book also included an explanation of the readings. That's how Sunday began. We were already entering into the liturgy in a joyful atmosphere. The next day we went to Mass. My home is very close to Salzburg, so we had a lot of music, Mozart, Schubert, Haydn. And when the Kyrie began, it was as if heaven had opened. And at home, the big lunch together was naturally important. We also sang a lot. My brother is a great musician. He composed music for all of us already as a young man, and the whole family sang. Dad played the zither and sang. They are unforgettable moments. Then, of course, we took trips together, walking. We were near a forest, and so walking in the forest was very nice. Adventures, games, etc. In a word, we were one heart and one soul, with many shared experiences, even in very hard times, because it was wartime. First there was the dictatorship, then poverty. But this love that we had for each other, this joy, even in simple things, was strong. And so we were able to overcome and endure even these things. I think it was very important that even little things gave us joy, because the other person's heart expressed itself in this way. And in this way, we grew up in the certainty that it was good to be a human being, because we saw that God's goodness was reflected in our parents and in us children. And to tell you the truth, if I try to imagine a little how paradise will be, I think always of the time of my youth, of my childhood. In this context of confidence, of joy and love, we were happy. And I think that paradise must look something like how it was in my youth. In this sense, I hope to go home, going to the other side of the world. Thank you for your attention.